all teas in the world, and most consumers don't know this, comes from a single flower called Camellia sinensis. And Camellia sinensis by itself is a shallow rooting plant that you tend to find in the tropic areas. If taken care of properly, this can give you high quality tea for maybe even up to 100 years. And at the same time, if left unattended, a Camellia sinensis plant can actually become a fully mature tea tree. So firstly, all tea comes from Camellia sinensis. And there are essentially 4 different types of tea the way we see it. There's white tea, there's green tea, there's oolong tea, and then there's black tea. And essentially all of it is just basically different stages of processing or different stages of oxidization, which allows for each tea type to have its own unique behavior, characteristic, and taste. Simplistically put, white tea is something that you pluck and you just simply dry. In the case of green tea, you pluck it, you heat it so that it ceases the oxidization, and then you dry. In the case of oolong tea, you pluck, you curl, you partially oxidize it and dry. And then black tea, which is you pluck, you cut, you curl, you fully oxidize and you dry. So white tea is the least processed, black tea is the most processed, and everything else is in between. Tea mastery is an art that started way back in the 18th century. So that many years of experience exists in the industry. But again, if you just look at it, tea is a plant. It varies, it has extremely high variance in terms of what you might get each time. Why? Because the soil conditions are different, the natural conditions in which it is growing is different, how it is handled is different. So the first job that anyone has as a tea industry is what value do you want to put to that tea that you're buying, and which we call justified value. That's really where the first level of mastery comes in, where you need someone who's able to understand the nuances of the different types of tea and say, okay, this is the value that I'll put to this tea. Second is the art of blending. So if you think about it, from the same garden, if you were to buy 2 years of tea, the second year the tea may not taste the same as the first year. And yet, every time a consumer drinks a cup, we promise to deliver a certain rich, flavorful taste and an enticing aroma. And how does that happen? That happens through blending. A lot of people sometimes think that blending is just simply putting 2 different tea types together. It's not. It's essentially ensuring that a natural product is varied out in such a way that the end cup that a consumer gets every time is the same. So the first thing that happens in the factory is black tea comes in from the different auctions in the gardens that we buy from, and each comes in a sack which is marked out for us, the system, to know which garden has it come from. Once that tea comes in, like I said, the master blenders, their job is to taste the different kinds of tea and come up with what we call a blend sheet, which simplistically put is a recipe. This recipe is then entered into the system for the computers to know exactly how much of which tea is required for that blended cup. Once that's entered into the system, then after that the robots take over. Human hand doesn't touch a single pack of tea at any stage in its production. So the robots start going and picking up the number of sacks required for that blend to be made, and that is then carried into what we call the blend cistern. So that's really where you're putting in all the different kinds of tea, and then it's being mixed properly to make sure that it's perfectly blended. So once blended, this tea goes into a whole system of pipes that run overhead, which are connected with different production lines. Why? Because in this factory, we produce different kinds of tea. So depending on what this blend is meant for, this then goes into the packaging lines, where it then goes into its pack types, and then finally sealed and produced. When you are tasting tea, the slurp is extremely important because it really allows for the master to take in the nuances of tea while it's still in the tongue and the mouth. When you sip something, essentially it goes straight inside, and hence you're not being able to use all the sensory faculties which are available to us in our mouth. And which is why the slurp and rolling of the product in the mouth allows for us to discern between different elements of it. Not very different from wine tasting, by the way, and that also you will see the slurp happen. Second is tea, when evaluated, is evaluated over 4 parameters. We call it the THIM score, which is taste, the hue, the intensity of the tea, and the mouthfeel. And this act of slurping allows for the taste and the mouthfeel to be better discerned. Lastly, as far as being a master blender is concerned, it's not an easy thing to do. You have to essentially taste almost 1,000 cups a day for a minimum of 5 years for you to be able to develop the level of sensory differentiation that's required, the nuances that are required for you to be able to then evaluate different kinds of tea.